Okay, hi folks. Welcome to My Life with Robert Burns. I'm here with Jim Thompson to chat with one of our cronies from around the Burns world. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Douglas. Hi, everybody.
Today, we're delighted to have a blether with the Burns Federation archivist, who is also the editor of the Burns Chronicle. Here to tell us about his life with Robert Burns, please welcome Bill Dawson.
A great privilege to be with you both today, and everyone else who is joining in. It is indeed an honour to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill. Maybe we just start by getting you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Aye, well, where would one start? I say I am. Let's see. I was born in Clackmannan in 1952. Clackmannan is a small village in the smallest county in Scotland. It's about 8 miles east of Stirling on the north side of the Forth. I say now I grew up in that village. Now, my father ran a joinery and contracting business, and I always aspired to get into construction as a profession, if you like. So at secondary school, Alba Academy, I wanted to take subjects that leaned towards my building aspirations, and that cost me some academic development because the school were geared towards a classic rather than a vocational education, if you like, and I was never particularly a student of literature or history or anything like that. So never particularly literally inclined. Now, after school, I went to Napier in Edinburgh, again because they offered practical courses, whereas if I'd gone to Heriot-Watt or some of the other more academic universities, I would have had to do first year university maths and sciences or whatever, and whereas at Napier you go into your building subjects virtually on your first year. I got married just before my finals, and on graduating I took a post with the newly formed Clackmannan District Council in their building control department, rising to senior inspector in that building control line. And as I say, before deciding to work for a living, I left local authority and went to join my father in his business, just as he started to make noises about thinking about retiring. So I worked on a number of interesting projects. The company had a specialist line by that time in doing work on historic buildings, and we did quite a number of interesting historic projects for a few years, but that work dried up in the economic squeeze on government finances, and so we had to just fight for whatever else was going. Now, I go back to some of my personal life. I got married. My daughter was born in 1975, and my son on January the 27th, 1977, it's his birthday today. And being January, I brought my wife and son home from hospital, and then immediately left them to go to a Burns supper. And despite all this, my wife has always been my stalwart supporter in all my Burns activities. So that is kind of like my personal history, if you like.
Well, you want to give them a mention by name and maybe wish your son a happy birthday.
Well, yes, my wife Leslie, as I say, she's been my stalwart supporter and follower around a myriad of Burns suppers and events the length and breadth of the country and across the world. My daughter Paula. She has, we now have 2 grandsons, Max and Elliot, who is home learning while just about hoping to go to university next year. And my son Clark is, it's his birthday today, so wish him the very best for his, whatever that is, 44 or whatever he is. So yeah, so I say, my daughter, and son are in their 40s, and my eldest grandson is 25. My youngest, he's 17. So he's bigger than I am, and he's smarter than I am, and a lot going for him. So look forward to a great joy a great joy from family and grandsons. Yeah.
And have you lived in in Clackmannan all your days?
Right. I lived in Clackmannan, born and brought up, and went back to live there when I came back from Napier. Firm went bust in the recession of 92, and I started tramping about finding work wherever I could. I lived for a few years in Caithness, came back down to live in Perth, and we lived in Perth for a number of years, and came back to live in Alloa, home patch as it were, about 14, 15 years back. So we've been back in the home patch. No, actually, about 17, because we came back when my second grandchild was expected, because we'd missed out on contact with the first one. Living in Perth at the time, we had to virtually make an appointment to come down and see him, and yeah. So when our second one was on the way, we had a hankering to come back, and we came back to where we currently are. And this is probably the house we've lived in longest of anywhere we've been. We've been about here, say 14, 15, well, 17 years now. And so I'm back in Alloa, as opposed to our Ayrshire contemporary. And I say it's the smallest county in Scotland, under current restrictions that we're all supposed to stay in our own local authority area. I can go about 3 miles west and about the same east, and that's my total limit for travelling at the moment. The furthest I get is if I go up to Dollar or somewhere, which is about 6 miles, 7 miles up towards the Hillfoots, and that's about as far as I get in this current climate.
What about hobbies and interests other than Burns? Is there anything there?
No.
Yeah.
I say outside work and family, Burns is my only serious interest. I played golf as a youth, but particularly when I had young family, and then when I was essentially working for myself, working in the firm, I found that I couldn't always commit to the time required to meet with others, to socialise and have golf for foursome or such like. Whereas Burns was something I could pick up and lay down as time allowed. So that was kind of it. As you say, Burns became my sole interest and obsession from a relatively early age. Yeah, so no, it's something that I've been quite nutty about all my life, and as I say, it's something that has maybe suited my lifestyle, as it were, rather than consciously saying that Burns is my hobby. It's just something that I've always had a fallback. I could go and pick up on whatever Burns work or interest I was following.
And before we started recording, we were talking a bit about travelling. Has Burns allowed you to do a bit of travelling, and where have you got to?
Oh, well, yes, I've travelled for pursuing my Burns interest. I've been to the US on a number of occasions, Canada several times. I haven't really pursued Burns into Europe or I've been all over Scotland meeting Burns clubs. Say the main time I was doing the travelling was 2009 when I was president of the federation, and I did a lot of visits to clubs and occasions and events. That year, 2009, was a hectic year. So I travel to the US, or at least I have done as a matter of habit since the early century. 2005, I think, was my first visit to Urbana. I went to Halifax, Nova Scotia for their conference. I've been across to about maybe 10 or a dozen Urbana conferences in the last 15 years or so. So I wouldn't say I go every year, but I do like to make that a visit, whether it's to USA or Canada. The last time I was across was to Niagara Falls. No, yes, last time was to Niagara Falls. The time before that was Philadelphia. Both great visits, But I've had a number of very outstanding visits. But in saying that, I tend to go for the weekend, for the 2 or 3 days of conference. I don't tend to spend time because I tend to travel alone. My wife doesn't make the trip with me, although she has on a couple of occasions accompanied me. First time was back in 2007. There was a Urbana conference. Was actually on a cruise ship. We cruised out of Galveston across to the Mexican, the Cancun Peninsula, and that was a good conference on board the ship, and my wife went with me for that one. And the last time was Calgary Burns Club hosted Urbana, and because of weather conditions in Calgary, it was slightly later than it normally is, and it was in late May. And now my wedding anniversary is the late May, and I couldn't disappear to Urbana on my wedding anniversary. So my wife went with me to Calgary, and we had a week in Western Canada as part of my Burns jaunt. So it's all a bit of variety. But as I say, I go to Urbana, I say fairly habitually. I have been on other trips to US. I have built an association. Now, my first trip to the US, I think, was probably to Burns Conference in Atlanta in 2001. My wife did go with me to Atlanta, and from that Burns Conference, the next year, I think, Les Strachan was across in Glasgow for the Glasgow Conference, and he recognised me from Atlanta rather than me recognising him. Although I did know him from Atlanta, I didn't know him as a friend at that time. And Les Strachan came across the room at lunch and said, "You may remember me," and introduced himself. And from that, we had a conversation and a pint, and an email correspondence, very sporadic email correspondence sprung up. And then in 2004, spring of 2004, just as he was signing off an email, he said, "Oh, in 3 weeks' time, I'm going down to Columbia, University of South Carolina. All the usual suspects will be there: Ken Simpson, Jerry Carruthers, and others." And I went back to him and said, "What's happening at South Carolina? That sounds interesting." And from that, I emailed Patrick Scott at University of South Carolina and says, "Patrick, this meeting you've got going on the end of April, he says, is it open to everyone?" He said, I'd like to come across, and he was quite surprised at that. So yeah, that was it. I went to South Carolina. I flew out on the Friday morning, arrived in Atlanta, in Columbia, South Carolina, Friday afternoon, because of the time difference. Was just in time for the evening dinner and the start of the celebrations. I had the Saturday and Sunday in this relatively small colloquium that was organised to celebrate Ross Roy's 80th birthday. And then on the Sunday lunchtime, I left to fly home again. So that was it. That was one of my first trips. I can remember when I was getting on the plane, I got a phone call from the kitchen fitter, or the manager of the kitchen fitting firm on one of the sites I was after, and he was asking me a question. I said, "Look, I'm just about to get on a plane for America. I'll speak to you about this on Tuesday when I get back." And he says, no, this is urgent. I need to deal with this now. I says, "No, I'll speak to you on Tuesday." I'll be back on Tuesday. You know, he couldn't get a handle of that. But that was it, and that's kind of been my way of travelling to the US. I say I fly in on the Thursday probably now for the Friday, Saturday, Sunday-ish celebration, and generally leave the Sunday afternoon or the Monday to come home again. It's easier for me to take a couple of days off work than for me to make a week or so. So that was it, and that was what this last year that got cancelled. I was planning to go to Atlanta, Georgia for Urbana week, and then I was going to spend a bit of time at the University of South Carolina, because since my first visit there, I've built up a bit of a relationship with Patrick Scott, etc., at the University of South Carolina, and I've been back and forward there on several occasions. The best being I was invited to be the Orbison Roy Fellowship Scholar for a period, and I went across for say an extended 4 or 5 weeks and did basic research on Robert Burns as an invited scholar. Now that was a big deal for me to be invited, because fellowship scholars are normally established academics, and for me as it's a base club Burnsian, that was a big deal for me to get an invite for that. So yeah, but I've been to University of South Carolina for visits, again generally just weekends and such like, but I've been 3 or 4 times for extended visits. But although I'm in Columbia, South Carolina, I've never ventured much more than about 4 or 5 blocks from the university. So I can't say I'm a tourist. I'm a Burns visitor. You know,
you've stuck to the Burns purpose.
Oh yes, it's just.
Well, that lets us. I got you going down the Burns Road there under the guise of travel, and didn't give Jim a chance to get in. So I'll get Jim to come in and get into the nitty gritty of your life with Burns.
Well, the first question is easy. How did you get started with Burns? There has to be an initiation point.
That's easy. As a village joiner, my father had a selection of trestle tables which the firm would lend out to various village institutions, groups or whatever, for community events. You know, we took trestle tables out to the church hall or the guide hall or whatever for showing your presence, and up to the town hall for the flower show, and all over the place. And for the Burns Club, we would load our tables onto the lorry on a Friday afternoon just before lousing time, and down to the Masonic Hall, where the Burns Club stalwarts would meet and would set up the hall for a platform and tables out and everything for the supper. Now that was when it was a Friday supper, because licensing laws, a Saturday late night would break the Sabbath. So we would have our supper, or the club would have its supper on a Friday night, 6 o'clock for 6:30 start for a late night. So it was a big night. And anyway, on the Saturday, and latterly the Sunday morning, I would go down with my father in the lorry to clear the hall and pick up the bits and pieces. And part of that was, now the bar that ran the liquid refreshments in the night, they didn't have transport, so they would load their cases, beer cases and boxes and glasses onto the back of the lorry, and we would start the return journey. And of course, if we stopped at the back of the pub to unload their kit, the guys would have to go in for a wee refreshment on the morning, and I would go in the back door into the bar. And that was what really grabbed me, was because you see, you've got these guys, ordinary guys for the village, who I would recognise, the electrician, the engineer, lorry driver, or guys I knew about the village, and then they would have their discourse about what a grand night it had been the night before, and they would quote Burns' works, or they would voice a disagreement with something they'd heard, and somebody else would chip in for another point of view. And this amazed me, critically commenting and discussing on the great toasts and the performances and the night before. And as a young teen, I was totally overawed by the enthusiasm that was displayed for the memory of Robert Burns. And that was the kind of first thing that got me. Now, the Burns Club was restricted to 60 members because it was 60 men, because the Masonic Hall had a comfortable capacity of, I don't know, 120, 140, and the men all brought their wives. That was a kind of club standard. And this was a sought after membership. Now, my father hadn't been a member, but he eventually got a membership. And by the time the old pipe major of the village was thinking about packing in his haggis duties, he thought he'd take my younger brother along to pipe the haggis in. And since my younger brother was getting to go to the Burns supper, I should probably get to go as well. And since I'd been an assistant for a number of years by that time, I was probably about 17 by that time, I got to go to the Burns supper, which was for all, so as I say, my younger brother, he was piping in the haggis, and I was taken along as a plus one to the Burns supper. So when I was 16, 17 and enjoying my first Burns. Now, the Robert Bruce Burns Club of Clackmannan, now they had established traditions of excellence, really quite excellence, a high degree of excellence. And the greatest speakers they could get from wherever, on a toast list of half a dozen toasts, would have a quartet of singers who would do a couple of solos apiece, a couple of duets, a quartet, a fiddler, and recitations. We would have Tam O'Shanter, Holy Willie, and Cotter as a standard program. So yeah, they had a. Now, liquid refreshment was included in the supper. The tables were set. Everything was done by candlelight, and between the toasts, the barman, he would scoot around, the publican would scoot around, topping up the dram glasses and giving you a bottle of beer if you required it. And that was how they maintained the decorum. Is they had a guy measuring out the drink. The drink was part of the package, and you got ample, but he was keeping an eye on who was getting too much. And that, and having the ladies present, of course, added to the decorum of the night. And that was how the club maintained their standard. And that is a standard that I have always measured others by. And that was, it was the excellence and the quality of the enthusiasm that was displayed on that brought me to investigate the magical attraction of Robert Burns. So when I was studying in Edinburgh, I always managed to make sure I got home for the Burns supper weekend, so I could join in to the Burns supper. So when I came back to the area to work, I got more involved with the club, got involved with the committee, and I that was the next thing that fascinated me. I'd go to a committee meeting, and again, round the table, you'd get guys after the business was dealt with. They would converse with bits and pieces, and you'd get somebody would spontaneously quote a verse, and say lament to Glencairn or something like that. And when he gets to the tail end, the all joy then, I'll remember thee, Glencairn. It was this magical interest that folk had in literature and poetry and reverence for the bard that kind of sparked me off on it. Now, So that was my first real introduction into the Burns Club. Now, I was involved in the club for, obviously, on the committee for a while. I was president of the club as a relatively young man in my middle 20s, president twice actually. I was secretary for a spell, and all that time building my enthusiasm for Burns. And about that time was when I started really getting into it, I say, inspired by my younger brother, who was probably a harder, more ardent Burns scholar than I. But I started collecting Burns books. First of all, chasing down old chronicles to try and build up a set of chronicles. And if you read old chronicles, it doesn't take very much for you to really, that feeds your interest. Some of the quality of articles and enthusiasm and research that are in old chronicles are a great vehicle into general enthusiasm. So that was how I got into Burns. Now, the Burns Club never really had much to do with the area association of Burns clubs initially. When I was latterly on as president, I took an interest in the area association, principally to try and expand the level of contacts that the club had for artists and the like, and always try to find new sources of talent and such like. Now, that led to involvement in the federation, I say, and I went on from there. So from there, the federation decided, or the area association decided that we would host a federation conference, which led to me attending the Burns Federation quarterly meetings to build a rapport with our people. And I was chairperson of the organising committee for the conference in Stirling in 1984. I've been president of the area association for 2 years, for 2 periods of extended number of years on 2 occasions. So I started attending the Burns Federation about 1981. My interest was in the Lectures Committee, and I continued my interest. And then, of course, I was president of the Federation in 2009. And that was a great honour.
Yeah, it was the year of homecoming. You were president, if I remember correctly, Will. However, I mean, you've developed through the Federation for many years now, and you've been involved with the board of directors for many years. There's obviously more things about the Federation you could tell the people.
Yeah, well, as I say, I was involved in the Federation for many years. I say that, and going through the changes of the Federation from the totally volunteer-run society of strictly a federation of Burns clubs, international gathering of Burns clubs, if you like, and then of course the change to the Robert Burns World Federation, and I can't remember if the change to bring in individuals as members that happened after that. So yeah, there's been a lot of changes, I say, but back in the day, I say in 1984, when we had the Federation conference in Stirling, we had to limit attendance to 700. You know, if we had 700 at conference now, we would think we'd done something quite spectacular. But that was 700 delegates of clubs and associations rather than 700 individual members. So it was big changes. I've seen the membership decline, and I think a lot of that's got to do with our living patterns have changed, whereas before things thrived on village Burns clubs. The people grow up and move away from the village for whatever work commitments, and club societies, village societies in general, struggle to maintain. So Burns Federation membership has declined, and I think this is where international travel, international connection becomes more invaluable, because we've got to try and develop our associations with others on a broader sphere. And this is where your web presence is helping, and I see that as being a way forward to give us a further communication method of keeping us all together, because where we were previously a village society that we would meet once a month or whatever for a wee social gathering, we now can get together on Zoom and have a social gathering whenever we like, and we can have presentations and discussions and all sorts of manner of exchange on websites. So I think we're in a changing world, but I think it's a world we can all look forward to.
Just when you're saying that, Bill, I mean, quite often in the wider Burns circles, you hear people talking about the Burns movement. What's your view on the idea that Burns is a movement?
Well, see, this is what I was saying. Is there a Burns movement in Scotland? Yeah, there is no doubt about it. There is a grouping of all the clubs through the federation and whatever, and there are clubs out with the federation that could still be part of the grouping, if you like, because they are active all the year round. And then there is a myriad of celebration over a couple of crazy weekends in January that you couldn't really call an organised movement, but it is something that belongs very much to the character of Scotland now. When I was working in construction sites and such like, very often the conversation would come round to, you know, what you're doing this weekend and such like, or what were you doing? And if my interest in Burns came up, you always had somebody was curious about it, or would start to display their interest and affinity with Burns. A number of very interesting conversations and such like. And now, one interesting anecdote, if I can. I was on a site in Glasgow, and there was these couple of guys, a couple of labourers, who were brought in by a gangmaster and paid 30 quid a day cash in hand, you know, just casual day labourers. And one of them came to me and he says, "I'll no be in tomorrow, boss." He says, "It's Burns night tonight. My dad was a great Burns man, and on Burns night, me and the brother goes round to the Mo's house. She does the haggis and neeps and that. We get a few cans and then get the book out. My sister's a bonny singer, and we do a couple of songs, a few poems and that. Great night." Then that was as I say, a basic day labourer was making his Burns celebration something particular to him. And you see, the number of times the conversation would come round to Burns on a site. Another time, see, I remember this big, I'm having a conversation and it goes round to, as I say, Burns, and this big hairy labourer stands up. He's hooking in a shuck, and he stands up. He says, "I mind when I was at a primary school, I got a certificate for the Burns Federation. Only thing I ever got at school. My mum's that proud she's still got it in the fridge." And then he says, "I did." And he started reciting to a moose, and he did the whole thing, and floored everybody round about him, because he's standing there with his tattoos up his arms and his summit on and his mucky boots on, and he gave you the greatest to a moose that I'd probably seen. And that was something that he'd learned in the primary school, and it was with him in his 30s, say, or something like that. But that's something about, if you like, a reflection of the Burns movement, that there is this movement that keeps Burns in the community. So yeah, I don't know if you can put your finger on anything that is a Burns movement. And I say we've got Centre for Robert Burns Studies driving the academic pursuit of Burns knowledge, and it's always amazes me how much new knowledge is to be gleaned from Burns in this day and age. And you know, here we are 250 years plus after his period, and we're still finding, as I say, new things to talk about. It's there's something going on, there's something moving, but whether you can categorize the whole as a collective movement is a different thing, you know. Yeah, so I'll let you take on over from there.
Well, you're not going to escape without a couple of minutes about what you're currently doing as editor of the Chronicle.
Well, that's an easy one. I don't do invest a lot about it. Aye, the Chronicle's good fun. Now, yes, the Burns Chronicle is evolving since. Now, I became editor of the Burns Chronicle. I was asked to be editor in 2010, when virtually overnight the previous editor fell out with the Federation and resigned, retired, left it. So I was asked to take on the editorship when it was still very much the part work 3 times a year, mixed between newsy reporting of what was going on in the clubs and academic articles. And that was fair enough as far as it went. But I had always had a hankering for the Burns Chronicle to go back to a once a year annual, having been an avid collector of the Burns Chronicle since the 70s. But when the board at that time, led by yourself, Jim, decided to take it into revert it back to an annual volume, that was a change when you had to fill the magazine with academic articles. And that was really when my skill set, if you like, as a Burnsian, really stepped up a gear, in as much as I had to cajole and source articles from all over, Burns enthusiasts, club members, academics or whatever, to try and fill an annual volume with articles which folk would find interesting and informative and value. And you see, the Burns Chronicle as an annual really is a repository of current Burns research and new thinking on Burns, which will last forever, because, as I say, you go back the 100 years, 120 odd years of Burns Chronicles, you can find stuff back there that recounts information about Burns and about Burns' life and his afterlife that you can't get anywhere else. The Burns Chronicle is the most referenced Burns publication, Burns source, anywhere in the Burns world, if you like. I think it's a great thing that the Burns Chronicle still exists to produce a repository of Burns thinking. Now, latterly, we have just had another sea change. We've changed now. We've developed a partnership with the Edinburgh University Press, and we've got Jerry Carruthers coming in as a co-editor with myself, and we're producing a biannual, about the same size, of 125 pages of Burns information and articles. And that's a wee bit of a challenge for me, because the contributors to the articles stepped up a wee bit. It is principally articles submitted by, I hate to use the word, serious academics, and peer reviewed. in academia, it's a case of, you know, you publish or die. You have to have your articles published. And it's quite good that the Burns Chronicle is considered now as a serious journal that these guys see as a useful vehicle for them to produce their articles for and publish it. It was always a wee bit of a slight annoyance to me that I would read something that was out there in academia, but I couldn't get it to publish in the Burns Chronicle because they wanted it to be published in a recognised peer-reviewed journal. Now I think we're going to develop the Burns Chronicle to be the leading peer-reviewed journal in Burns, and we will get all, I certainly hope, all the new Burns articles and research in the Burns Chronicle. It'll be there for us all to see now, but it'll also be there for folk to read 100 years hence. The Burns Chronicle will continue to be a repository of the best of Burns thinking in this day and age. That's not to say that I really want to develop a stream whereby we have contributions coming in from private, if you like, Burns Club enthusiasts who are thinking on stuff, researching stuff for themselves, and they want to produce articles. They don't need it or want it to be peer reviewed and picked at with academic critics, but it's still useful to have it in the Burns Chronicle as an interesting item for Burns enthusiasts. And we have, in the forthcoming edition of the Burns Chronicle, due out shortly, we've got, I think, 5 articles by scholarly articles, we're going to call them that, and then we've got similarly 5 short notes, if you like, of articles of Burns interest. I've got one that I've written about the composition of Tam O'Shanter, and I've got another one which is just reporting that the auction sales of Burns records. There's another one about what's going on at Ellisland, so that there's short notes of, if you like, newsy record of what's happening now, and so it's interesting. My Burns Chronicle style, if you like, is being moulded as times change, and we'll see how Burns Chronicle shapes up in the next while, and there'll be some reaction from the membership that is perhaps getting too strong and academic, but that's possibly a reflection of just the cycle of things, how we went in the 70s to carrying more news and personality information and less Burns, if you like, and now we've gone the full circle and we've come back to serious Burns study, seriously looking at aspects of Burns. So it's an interesting time, yeah.
Well, Bill, thanks very much for that. We're as usual running out of time before we're running out of things to talk about. That's been tremendous, and it's great to finish with some exciting news about the Chronicle, and even a wee taster of what's coming in the next one, which is excellent. I think we've got enough for this episode, but I'm sure we can come back and talk to you and maybe be a bit more specific about some of the interesting things you found when you've been looking at the Chronicles, and even some of the things you know about in your role as archivist. It would be up for doing that later on in the year.
Yeah, that'd be useful. Maybe leave it off a good while. As archivist, I haven't really got my feet off the ground on that one, because all the treasures, if you like, were all wrapped up and parcelled up before I became archivist, in anticipation of a removal from Dean Castle to and that didn't happen for a couple of years, and then it never really got around to getting unpacked when we've had problems at the office and all sorts of issues which has kept them wrapped up. And now, of course, I can't even travel to have a look at it. So we've still got to get things organised. So maybe once I get the archive.
Yeah, well, maybe time it for when you're starting to open the parcels.
Well, maybe if you give me a month or two beyond that and let me see what we've got.
Okay.
We've had interesting things come in, but I know there are interesting things for me to look at and discover. And we could maybe have a specific on the archive in some weeks, some months forward. Conversely, we could come back and specifically discuss Chronicle issues. Maybe again leave it until after as I said, the Burns Chronicle is going from an annual to a biannual. You'll get one out in end of February, beginning of March, and you'll get one end of September, beginning of October. So maybe if we come back in October, early November, to talk about the Burns Chronicle and how it is being viewed from a Burns club point of view. And it would help me get the feedback to develop further, so I can take it up to Jerry Carruthers and argue with him that this is still the Burns Federation's publication, and although he wants to fill it full of learned articles, scholarly reviewed articles, there is still room for private research and such like to be listed and contained in it. And so I say feedback from academia is good, and feedback to academia is something else that we should be doing more of. Yeah.
Good. That sounds like a plan. So it just leaves me with the job to say thank you very much for giving up your time for us this afternoon. We thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm sure our audience will enjoy listening to what you've had to say, and look forward to the next one. Thanks very much, Bill.
Please feel free to edit it as you will, because I do blather on a bit. Thank you very much.